Hello, church. This morning we had the opportunity to hear about the great miracle of raising Lazarus from the dead. What an amazing thing that would have been to experience that firsthand as a witness to that event. In this second glance, we want to kind of look at the perspective of what happened as we transition into what's going to be our Passion Week season. After Lazarus was raised from the dead, we immediately see two responses to what took place. At the end of chapter 11, we find out that all of a sudden the Jewish leaders configure a plan to say, how do we get rid of this guy? First of all, they acknowledge that what he is doing is true. They've witnessed it firsthand. But their problem is, what happens if all of the people start believing in what Jesus is doing? Their concern wasn't as much a spiritual concern as it was a political one as to would Rome come in and have them overtaken because of what's happening because they feel threatened. So all of a sudden, after Lazarus is raised from the dead and it goes from sorrow and weeping to great excitement and joy, we now see behind the scenes what is unfolding as we are inching closer each week to what's going to happen to Jesus. At the end here, it shows, and I found this very interesting. It talked about Caiaphas, who was the high priest. He says to them, in verse 50 of chapter 11, listen to this. Do you understand it is better for you that one man should die for the people than for the whole nation to perish? Here it is. It's stated clearly. Let's get rid of this one guy and spare the whole nation. And as they're looking to do this, it goes on and says in verse 51, he did not say this of his own accord, but being the high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for this nation. It's interesting that all the things that have happened, all the miracles have been done, people being healed, the blind can see, the lame can walk, a man walks out of his grave. We now have, let's take out Jesus. It's very clear here from John's writing. And because of this, and as we talked about this morning, Jesus and the disciples were already aware that it was dangerous to go back because the people were trying to stone him. There were people that were trying to obviously take him out. And what we see now is it says that Jesus no longer walked in public. He no longer went out amongst the Jews, but kind of used the wilderness as a cover. Even Jesus recognized what was coming. He had talked about it many times, not just in John's gospel, but the other gospel accounts of what would take place. And now we see, as this unfolds, we are ever so close to what's going to be the crucifixion of Jesus, but then ultimately his resurrection. And so at this time of the year, we're at the Passover feast, and everything's taking place. And the Jewish leaders are actually saying, hey, we have this feast now. He's probably going to show up. So let's be on the lookout for him. And when we do, or if anyone sees or knows the whereabouts of Jesus, let us know why so we can arrest him. I don't want to jump into everything that's going to happen as we inch into Palm Sunday and then the Passion Week and then ultimately Easter Sunday. But it's great to see this from a standpoint of historical context. That here is the high priest saying, let's take out one man. Let's take out one man for the whole nation. Like the seed is already planted. Maybe you've always thought it was planted the night that Jesus was arrested, but actually it goes back to a little over a week before that when Caiaphas, as the high priest, says, let's take out Jesus. Let's kill Jesus and spare the nation. And therefore, here we are, the Pharisees, the priests are putting out this I guess, not so much a command, but a directive to say, hey, if anyone knows where Jesus is, let us know so we can arrest him. And we obviously know that what's going to happen is Judas is used. And that's the first response. So after everything that's happened, and we see what happened with Lazarus, the response of the Jewish leaders and the priests is, let's arrest Jesus and take his life to spare the nation. So that's the first response. The second response is the one that we want to really focus on, where here we are 6 days before the Passover in chapter 12. Jesus has just raised Lazarus from the dead, And obviously, as we talked about this morning, Jesus was close with Lazarus and his family, especially Lazarus and his two sisters, Mary and Martha. It says that Mary took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. When we think about that, this was an expensive perfume, and it was worth a year's wages. It's in an alabaster jar, which is extremely expensive, and it says it was pure. As she puts it on the feet of Jesus, now we know that typically when guests would come into a house, they would clean their feet, and they would have people to do that. Here, Mary is doing this and anointing Jesus with this very expensive perfume, and then using her own hair to wipe them. And it says the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume, which is interesting because as we see later on, it talks about Jesus filled everything like a pleasant aroma. Here we see Jesus being anointed and the pleasant aroma is on him. And the response should be, wow, look what he's done for this family and everything else. But instead, Judas actually says, could this not be sold for a year's wages, 300 denarii, and given to the poor? Now, we know based on historical context that Judas wouldn't care about giving to the poor, that he was someone who skimmed off the top. But his focus goes away from the worship of Jesus and instead says, how could we have made money off of this? Jesus' response is clear. In verse 7 of chapter 12, it says, leave her alone so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. It's interesting sometimes how we go to the highs of life and immediately things feel like they drop. I'm not saying that happened with Jesus here, but what we see is the response of man. We see the adulation of, wow, here's a guy that raised someone from the dead. Oh my goodness, people are believing, to, hey, let's take out one man. Let's arrest him and take his life to spare the nation. Or why would you allow her to do that? Because you can have so much more money to give to the poor. Instead, the focus should be just like Mary. Here's a man who not just raised Lazarus from the dead, but has done so much, and he is worthy of worship. As we go into this season, does Jesus really get all of the worship or the worth that he is due from us? What response do we have? This is a time of reflection, and as we go into the season, that is our prayer, is that you would reflect on the importance of not just what Jesus did on the cross, but the fact that he walked out of the grave. And so over this time, use these opportunities to talk to others about it, because as you know, in our culture, there are all kinds of responses when it comes to Jesus.